Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 3, The Queen's Justice. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Game of Thrones, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Game of Thrones up to Season 7, Episode 3. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So this was a very powerful episode, and things are certainly moving along, and I do believe we are finally getting that fast pace that we were promised in Season 7, but not too fast as to feel rushed. The only thing that kind of felt rushed was the ending with Jaime's conquest of Highgarden, although I don't really blame them for not showing the battle and just skipping over it, as it wasn't really necessary. Anyway, we get a lot of golden, truly engaging scenes in this episode, none more so than the dialogue scenes. And although I do get very frustrated with the pig-headedness of a certain someone, I still did really enjoy the scenes that she was in. And I would say overall, every scene in this episode was golden in driving home the main story of the series, making this a very effective episode. So let's start with Dragonstone and the epic coming together of two fan favorites and main characters who have been driving the show ever since Season 1, Daenerys and Jon Snow. And yes, it was a bit frustrating seeing both be stubborn and unmovable. However, decidedly Daenerys was being much worse, but either way they both need each other and would make perfect allies, so it was frustrating just seeing them bicker over semantics. But I was more upset with Daenerys as she began with being very stern and unmovable by demanding Jon bend the knee. That's not at all how she reacted to Yara and Theon Greyjoy. In fact, she even granted them their own independence, saying, "Oh, others are free to ask." And yet, she begins by insulting Jon, refusing to call him king. In fact, Melisandre's introduction of Daenerys felt a lot more aggressive than usual, and she was cold to Davos when he tried to make small talk with her. In fact, other than Tyrion, Jon's whole reception at Dragonstone felt very cold and uninviting, which is a horrible way to make a new ally. She didn't behave this way with Yara, Laria, or Lady Olenna. I mean, even if she insists that he bend the knee and swear fealty to her, she should have started by hearing him out and trying to court him as an eventual ally instead of just beginning by being antagonistic. Perhaps she's gotten too arrogant where she thinks her victory is assured. She did later take a more softer tone with him after she learned that her Ironborn and Dornish allies were all but gone. And I dare say her tone will likely soften even more when she finds out what happened to her Tyrell allies. I guess it just goes to show you shouldn't start out by being arrogant. On the other hand, though, it did seem odd to me that Jon was so insistent that he not bend the knee, as he himself never really wanted to be king of the North, and his main concern was fighting against the White Walkers, and bending the knee will get him closer to that cause, I don't see why he would care. I actually thought it was a good counter-argument to Tyrion when Davos gave his big speech about it doesn't matter who skeleton sits on the Iron Throne. He was simply like, well, if it doesn't matter, then why not just bend the knee? But I suppose the issue is he wasn't convinced bending the knee would help him against the White Walkers, because Daenerys would order him to bring his men south, which is the last thing that he wants to do, and also the fact that she was coming on so strong and behaving so adversarially. I could understand him instinctively being resistant to that. So I actually mainly blame Daenerys for bringing up like ancient history with Torrhen Stark and then saying that because he calls himself king, that means he's in open rebellion against her. That's the kind of idiotic, closed-minded sentiments I berated Stannis for doing in Season 2 with his whole, "Oh, they'll bend the knee or I'll destroy them" speech. As from his perspective, he was the rightful monarch of Westeros Westeros as well. But there's more to being a ruler than being the rightful monarch of Westeros. I love how Davos pointed out that Jon is just a bastard and people follow him because he earned it. And while Daenerys has earned the devotion of some of her followers for what she did in Slaver's Bay, she's still unfamiliar to the people of Westeros, and for her to expect everyone to just give her blind devotion based on nothing is ridiculous. But I dare say this whole adversarial situation was a plot device in order to create tension, as Dany and Jon's alliance will be a hard-fought one and will begin with conflict in order to keep things interesting. However, that's not to say I didn't like these scenes, because I absolutely loved them. Seeing Daenerys and Jon verbally spar was pure gold. It was really funny, though, how it began with Melisandre going on this typical long spiel with all Daenerys' billion titles, and Jon looked at Davos, and he was just like, this is Jon Snow. And then he looked at him again. Davos was like, oh yeah, he's king of the north. That was awesome. That was so great. Not just because it was funny, but also because it shows a contrast between them and how the Northerners are not just less formal, but also more humble. It was also interesting hearing Daenerys apologize to Jon for her father's transgressions against his family. That's probably the only smart thing she did in that conversation. And it was interesting that Jon was faced with the same situation with the Karstark and Umber kids, as he said that they're not responsible for the actions of their family members. So he had to admit that the same was true for Daenerys as well. But of course, that alone doesn't mean he should bend the knee to her. It was really interesting seeing Tyrion and Jon meet again. I'm glad they so referenced the time that they spent together in season 1 and how far they've come since then, and they both seem to trust each other. I love the conversations they had while walking up to meet Daenerys. Tyrion was very open and candid, even pointing out that he was sure all of Jon's advisors probably told him not to come. And overall, the conversation was like two old friends reminiscing, and although I know they didn't know each other that well, they did get along really well in the short time that they did spend together, so I totally bought this relationship. And even during the time where Daenerys was being a dumbass, Tyrion was trying his hardest to smooth things over between the two of them, and you can tell how frustrated he was when things weren't working out. The look on Tyrion's face when Daenerys threatened Jon was golden, as you could tell he was not at all happy the way things were going, and that he really wanted things to work out between them. I mean, it can't be said enough how amazing an actor Peter Dinklage is. But what I enjoyed even more was the scene where Tyrion went to console Jon after their meeting didn't go so well, and Tyrion learned of the Dornish and Greyjoy defeat. His comments about brooding was humorous, as that's also a reference to how Kit Harington always looked like he's brooding. But this whole interaction was great. I loved how Tyrion told Jon he believed him about the White Walkers. Jon made reference to what Tyrion said about Grumpkins and Snarks, but that was at the start of their journey to the Wall. Since then, Lord Commander Mormont and Maester Aemon were starting to convince Tyrion otherwise, as he trusted both of their judgments. And in Season 2, when Lord Commander Mormont sent a letter to King's Landing warning about the White Walkers, and Cersei just dismissed it as nonsense, Tyrion wasn't so quick to dismiss it. So I liked how Tyrion did mention Lord Commander Mormont, and he said he trusted both him and Jon Snow's judgment. I still don't think he realizes how big of a threat the White Walkers are, but at least believing in them is a start. So Tyrion does talk to Daenerys on his behalf and speaks wisdom to her about trying to make another ally in Jon Snow after they just lost two of their allies, and also that she can gain some favor with him by giving him something that's useless to her but very powerful to him. It was interesting how she brought up what Davos said about him getting stabbed in the heart, and Tyrion just dismissed it as the fancy of northern men, but she didn't seem so convinced. I don't think she's going to let this one go. And I did appreciate Daenerys and Jon's second conversation more, as she was being more reasonable. Of course, she did talk more about how she still considered the North one of her kingdoms, and yet the Iron Islands are expendable, and she doesn't care if they're not one of the kingdoms, but whatever. I have a feeling their relationship will get better from here on out, but we'll see. So backtracking a bit to Melisandre, her and Varys' conversation was interesting. It was also interesting that she said that she was going to Volantis, so I suppose we probably won't be seeing her for the rest of the season, but I dare say we will see her again before the show ends. This I think was foreshadowed by her saying that she would die in Westeros, so perhaps we would even see her die in Westeros before the end of the show, but we'll see. At any rate, I can understand why she wouldn't want Jon, or especially Davos, to see her again, as they didn't leave on the best of terms. However, regardless of how pissed off they would be at her being there, I dare say she could have helped in that meeting, as Daenerys seemed a lot more accepting of her, and she could have helped back up what Jon was saying about the White Walkers, and even back up Davos about the resurrection, and trying to convince Daenerys not to be so dismissive of him. That being said, I still can't fault her for not wanting Davos to see her again, as he promised to kill her, but that's if she went north, but they're not in the north, but still it would throw Jon and Davos off. And I have to mention how Melisandre talked about bringing ice and fire together, an obvious reference to A Song of Ice and Fire, but I am curious to see if that will indeed be the main theme for the ending of the show. Jon Snow and Daenerys, that is. So let's move on to King's Landing with Euron bringing Cersei these great gifts. I fucking love Euron. Well, more accurately, I love to hate him. But yeah, I think his character is great and adds a lot to the story. I'll say again, he's pretty different than anything we've seen on the show. A lot of people are comparing him to Joffrey and Ramsay, and frankly, I like him better than both of them. Especially the way he acts here, where he blows kisses back to the crowd, talks to Yara about how it makes him hard, and I absolutely love the way he acted to Jaime and asked him how Cersei likes it, and the look on Jaime's face when he mentioned the finger in the bum was absolutely golden, and Euron passed it off like, oh, we'll just chat again later as friends, when he's really just fucking with Jaime. And again, I really love this character. I was expecting how Cersei would react to Euron's gift, as it's obviously an overture for a marriage proposal, and surprisingly she said yes, but then added the provision after the war was done. Euron must know that she has no intention of fulfilling this vow, or maybe I'm wrong, maybe she does, but I doubt it. On the other hand, she did say if she did win this war, pissing off or failing to fulfill a promise to the man who controls the most powerful fleet in Westeros would be a bad idea. However, on the other hand, to marry this really shady and untrustworthy guy while she has no heirs, clearly meaning that he would simply kill her to steal the throne, is not a good idea either. So kind of a precarious situation either way. But as we've seen with Cersei, she's not always great at thinking ahead. Right now, she needs him to win the war, so she's just going to string him along. So I was a bit unclear on what was going to happen to Yara, as Euron went through the trouble of dragging her through the streets of King's Landing, but didn't give her to Cersei and just took her back with him. I suppose he just wanted her to experience the humiliation of being dragged through the streets of King's Landing. It remains to be seen what he will do with her. So, as I and a lot of other people guessed last week, Cersei kills Alaria's daughter in front of her in order to punish her for killing her daughter. But in true Cersei style, she goes the extra mile of being extra fucked up and cruel. And not only did she kill her, but she killed her slowly and forced Ellaria to watch her slowly die, and then plans to just leave the body there to decay as Ellaria is forced to watch for the rest of her life. That's really fucked up. It actually took me a few moments to catch on after Cersei kissed Tyene. I was like, oh, why is she kissing her? But the characters caught on pretty quick what was going on. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That's exactly how Ellaria killed Marcella. And of course, when Cersei started wiping off the lipstick, I knew exactly what was up. So I kind of had mixed feelings about this scene. It was like when Cersei was torturing Septa Unella, as I felt that Septa Unella was self-righteous zealot and she deserves the Cersei treatment. Whereas here, the thing is, I think Ellaria does deserve punishment for killing Marcella, because not only was that a fucked up thing to do, but it was totally stupid, not at all justified, because Oberyn died in a legal trial by combat because of his own arrogance. So killing an innocent teenage girl because of that made absolutely no sense, and plus Ellaria and the Sand Snake deserved to die for betraying and killing their own kin for no good reason. So I did think they did deserve their comeuppance, but this was just too cruel. And I have, I have to give props to the actress that played Ellaria and Tyene, because you could see the total heartbreak of being trapped and helpless and forced to watch your own daughter die. So I was torn between thinking they deserved it to thinking, well, this was just too tragic and cruel to happen to anyone. And plus the fact I have no respect for Cersei and think she needs to lose also colored this for me. So ultimately, this was a very effective scene in the fact that it was complex and not simply this is how you should feel kind of scene. Also goes to show how fucked up Cersei is, that by doing these fucked up and disturbing things to her enemies actually gets her hot and makes her want to get it on with Jaime. Now, Jaime's resistance here, I think, is showing that he's not so on board with this dark Cersei, and I think the divide will grow and was even played at the end of the episode, but I'll get to that later. But of course, he couldn't help himself, and I love the morning after scene where Cersei doesn't give a fuck about her handmaiding seeing them in bed together. She's just like, well, I'm queen, so I can do whatever I want. But this does sort of give rumor fodder, which could come back to bite her in the ass, or maybe not. Maybe people are just too afraid to talk shit about her, but we'll see. So then we see Cersei meet with Tyrion Nestoris from the Iron Bank of Braavos. This was interesting, as he seemed rather warm to Cersei, but of course I think most of that Cersei knew most of that was fleeting, and she was able to see through this because she knows the bottom line is that they want their money back. If you remember, in Season 5, she had to send Mace Tyrell to Braavos to try to get them off their backs. So she knows they're getting a bit itchy, and she also knows that if they don't get paid, they have a tendency to fund the enemies of those that owe them money, which, by the way, they've already done by funding Stannis, but that didn't work out too well for them. But Cersei very rightfully is concerned that they will fund Daenerys, so she gives a very effective speech about how doing so would be a bad idea, and she ends that speech with the most convincing part, well, the only part that really matters, that is that he will get all the money that he's owed before he leaves King's Landing. And we see by the end of the episode how she intends to acquire those funds, and that's by stealing them from Highgarden, because Cersei knows that whichever side has the backing of the Iron Bank has a massive advantage in war, so she wants to make sure that it's her and not Daenerys, which is smart. I did find it interesting how Tycho kept saying that she is her father's daughter. But is she really? In the past, she's proved to be more arrogant and less intelligent than he was, which tends to be her downfall. As of the end of this episode, she seems to be doing quite well for herself, but will she be able to maintain it? I don't know. Seeing how badly her plans have gone in the past, it does make me question that, but we'll have to see. So let's go up to Winterfell now, where we see Sansa having a meeting with a maester and 2 lords from the Vale on how best to handle Winterfell and what to do about Winterfell. Okay, sure, whatever. Anyway, the point of this scene was to show how Sansa was an effective leader and doing a good job at running Winterfell, as she's making sure, the armor has leather and they have enough food to last through the winter and all that good stuff. What's more interesting is that she continues to be extremely rude and antagonistic to Littlefinger, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think she's extremely smart to keep him at arm's length, as he is a master manipulator, and I think she knows this. I like how she was like, "Oh, so your great advice is that the woman who killed my father, mother, and brother is dangerous. Thanks for the input." However, when Littlefinger gives his advice of fighting every battle everywhere in your mind, it is great advice, and I think he's being sincere here and not trying to manipulate her, as Littlefinger does want her to be a great ruler, because in his mind, he wants her to rule by his side. So then we get Bran returning to Winterfell, and I'm a bit disappointed we didn't see more scenes with Bran and Ed at the wall, but whatever. Point is, he's back in Winterfell, although he doesn't really say why he's returned to Winterfell. Certainly not to have a heartfelt reunion. Perhaps so he could hang out by a heart tree in relative safety. So Bran has certainly changed to be pretty non-feeling, as when Sansa hugged him, he just stares blankly and doesn't hug back. However, I did note when he first saw Sansa and said hello to her, he did smile a bit, so there's something there. So here's something I think Season 6 didn't do a very good job at explaining, that after his last visit to the Heart Tree, when he said it was time for him to become the Three-Eyed Raven, and we see him go in the past and learn about Jon's parentage, they apparently, this has also changed him to become like the Three-Eyed Raven, where he can see everything at once, and doing so apparently has caused him to become more of kind of sterile and unfeeling. And I find it interesting that just when Littlefinger was talking about considering everything at once, Bran comes along and says he can actually see everything that's happening everywhere and everything that's happened. Think of what an advantage that would be if Sansa knew exactly what was happening with Jon Snow in the south, or Cersei in King's Landing, or the impending White Walker threat. However, Bran seems to indicate that's all, kind of a jumble to him right now, and he needs to learn how to sort through it. And it was also very interesting how he said he needs to talk to Jon. Clearly what he needs to talk about is Jon's true parentage. So I don't think Sansa really believed Bran until he proved it by describing her wedding night, a quite disturbing night for her. So you can tell how disturbed she was by this meeting and see how unfeeling Bran has become. But I'm hoping that she'll look past this and see what an advantage he'll be. But I can't really blame her because he was being really creepy. But we'll see. So then we get a bit of Sam in Old Town, as we see he was successful in curing Jorah of grayscale. I'm sure some people were disappointed about how easily Jorah's grayscale was cured, but I didn't really have a problem with it. I found it a bit touching how grateful Jorah was, and when Sam reached out his hand to shake Jorah's, it was a very touching moment. And of course, Jorah's first order of business is to return to Daenerys, so it'll be interesting to see what happens when he does. However, Sam didn't get kicked out of the Citadel as I suspected he would, because he knew I knew he wouldn't be able to hide the fact that he cured Jorah without permission, because that was beyond obvious, so he might as well have just stole the milk of the poppy in order to save Jorah a lot of pain, but whatever. Anyway, I knew he couldn't hide what he did, so I thought he was done for, because so far we've seen the Maesters as these unreasonable jackasses. So it was strange to see Empress actually compliment Sam on curing Jorah. So for a second I was like, maybe I misjudged him. But then he ordered Sam to rewrite all these screws and do all these busy work. And he was like, what, were you expecting your reward? Your reward is not being expelled from the Citadel. And I was like, oh, okay. Now they're the same old dickheads. I was starting to wonder now if Sam is actually going to just quit himself. But maybe not. We'll just have to see. So finally, let's cover the two big battles at the end, as we finally get to see, for the first time, two castles which have been mentioned on the show for years but never before seen, Highgarden and Castle Rock. So first off, we get a scene with Daenerys and her advisors talking about the Ironborn defeat, where Daenerys just wants to go off on fly on her dragons and track Euron down so she can burn his fleet, but her advisors very wisely shot that idea down, as it's not a very good one. But then we see Tyrion explain the Unsullied strategy to take Castle Rock. Now, first of all, I find it hard to believe that Daenerys and the others wouldn't already know this plan before the Unsullied left, but it was a good storytelling device to show the Unsullied conquest of Castle Rock with a voiceover from Tyrion explaining the plan. It was a good way to get around the fact that Grey Worm was literally the only main character at Castle Rock. As at first I kind of suspected they would have someone like Jaime or another main character there in order to have more main characters in the scene, but they got around this by just kind of making Tyrion and Daenerys part of this scene, and I thought that played out very well. But as it turns out, the Lannisters let them have Castle Rock as a distraction as they took their full might south to conquer Highgarden, and they had Euron come behind and burn the Unsullied's fleet to keep them trapped at Castle Rock, which was emptied of provisions. Jaime even mentioned this was a similar tactic that Robb Stark used against them when he was captured. So this gets back to what I was saying about Cersei needing the Tyrell gold to pay back the Iron Bank. That made Highgarden the priority target, and Castle Rock was just kind of expendable. Now, in my most recent video, I defended Tyrion's tactic on attacking Castle Rock, as I described it as being completely demoralizing for the Lannister troops, and I stand by that statement. However, it's not the case here because they didn't necessarily take Castle Rock as much as the Lannisters gave it to them or let them have it in order to enact a greater, more successful strategy. So that's not demoralizing at all. So it seems now that the Lannisters are winning, and all of those who trashed Tyrion's plans as being stupid probably feel a bit vindicated, as that it's been proven to be a bad plan, as Tyrion thought he would use his knowledge of Cersei against her, but instead she used his knowledge of him against him, and so far Daenerys is losing. And at the end of last season, everyone assumed Cersei was done for, but here it looks like things had turned to her advantage, and now it looks like Daenerys is the one who's done for. However, since Cersei wasn't quite, at the disadvantage that we thought, perhaps Daenerys isn't as well. So then we get the final scene where we get the death of a major character, Lady Olenna, and she certainly did go out like a badass, which of course shouldn't expect anything less of her. And overall, I really liked the scene with her and Jaime. It was a well-acted scene with amazing dialogue and overall just totally riveting. I loved how she waited until after she drank the poison to tell Jaime that she killed Joffrey, and seeing the look on his face when she revealed this is absolutely golden. And I wonder how this new information will affect things like how he thinks of Tyrion now that he knows definitively that he didn't kill Joffrey. And I also think that Lady Olenna's words about Cersei to Jaime will remain in the back of his mind and perhaps be paid more attention to later. As I mentioned earlier, Jaime very noticeably already has his doubts about Cersei, but is trying to ignore them. And the reason why he didn't like what Lady Olenna was saying here was because he knew that it was the truth. And to some point, he already agreed with her, but he's in denial and isn't ready to face it yet, and was just still spouting this BS about Cersei bringing peace to the Seven Kingdoms. But I think he knows in the back of his mind that that's bullshit, and I think Lady Olenna's words will be a seed of doubt that will grow, and the more mad that Cersei becomes. But I don't think there's any doubt that Lady Olenna is dead. Even though we didn't see her die on screen, she drank the poison and nobody's there to give her a cure. So yes, this most definitely was her death scene, and a great one it was. So my rating for the Queen's Justice out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. This was an amazing episode that was completely engaging throughout, as we were hit with poignant scene after poignant scene. The Jon and Daenerys scenes were simply amazing, as was seeing Cersei turn things to her advantage, and seeing Bran awkwardly return to Winterfell was cool too. The only slight issue I had with this episode was how annoyingly stubborn and arrogant Daenerys was being, which did kind of seem like it was done just for plot purposes in order to artificially create tension, but not a huge complaint. All in all, I still loved seeing Jon and Daenerys meet for the first time. So that's it for my review of The Queen's Justice. Be sure to join me this Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the U.S. for a live discussion I'll be doing on Episode 3 with Epkin Tomko, where our special guest this week is Darren from D's Reviews. So be sure to join us live in the chat for that. Also, check out my further analysis video where I get into more spoiler territory, which will be released a bit later in the week. Also, be sure to check out my channel for many other videos on other shows like Star Trek, Dark Matter, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.